At 1:54 in the morning on May 29th, a Russian drone crossed into Romanian airspace. It traveled 16 kilometers into the country. It struck the 10th floor of an apartment building in Galati. 2 people were hurt. The building caught fire. Romania is a NATO member state. Now, before you reach for the obvious reaction, before you reach for Article 5, escalation ladders, or the language of red lines, I want you to slow down. Because the instinct to treat this as a singular, shocking event is exactly the instinct that leads to the wrong analysis. This was Romania's 28th drone incursion since the war began. 28th. The only thing that changed this time is that someone got hurt. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Let me give you the full picture because there are 3 separate stories woven into what happened this week, and most coverage is only telling you one of them. The first is Romania itself. Romanian radar tracked the drone from the moment it crossed the border. 2 F-16s were scrambled. A helicopter was deployed. The pilots had a 5-minute window between border crossing and impact. The drone was traveling just under 200 kilometers per hour over a populated area less than 15 kilometers from Ukraine. And the call was made not to shoot it down. That decision will get criticized. It already is being criticized. But consider the geometry of what Romanian pilots were actually facing. A fast-moving target, a dense urban corridor below. Debris from an intercepted drone falling on a residential area can cause exactly the kind of casualties you were trying to prevent. Sometimes the safest option in a confined environment is to track, watch, and hope. This time, hope wasn't enough. But here is what that framing misses entirely. The failure was not at the intercept window. The failure is that a Russian drone ever got that far west in the first place. The correct question is not why Romania didn't shoot it down over Galati. The correct question is why it crossed the Danube at all. Now here's the second story, and it's the one almost nobody covered. 10 days before the Romania incident, on May 19th, a drone entered Estonian airspace from Russian territory. 2 Romanian F-16s shot it down. But these Romanian F-16s were not based in Romania. They were based in Šiauliai, Lithuania, part of NATO's enhanced Baltic air policing mission. The Carpathian Vipers Squadron, 100 personnel, 6 aircraft deployed April through July 2026. They were already airborne on a routine training sortie when NATO's Combined Air Operations Center in Udom, Germany, retasked them in real time for the intercept. They fired a single air-to-air missile. The drone went down in a marshy area south of Poltsama. No civilian casualties. No collateral damage. NATO Secretary General Rutte called it proof that the alliance's air defenses were effective yet again. He was right. The system worked. And the reason it worked is exactly why the Romania incident feels like such a sharp contrast. In Estonia, the drone came down over uninhabited terrain. The pilots had space to act safely. In Romania, they didn't. Geography, not capability, is the variable that changed the outcome. But there's something else about the Estonia intercept that received almost no attention in the coverage. That drone wasn't Russian. It was almost certainly Ukrainian. This is the part of the story that requires the most careful thinking. Ukraine fires hundreds of long-range drones at Russian energy and military infrastructure. Russia responds with GPS jamming, spoofing, and electronic warfare, deliberately redirecting Ukrainian drones off course, not just to neutralize them, but to send them somewhere politically inconvenient. The Estonian Defense Forces confirmed it directly. The drone entered their airspace under conditions of heavy electronic warfare, including GPS spoofing and jamming by Russia. Think about what that means strategically. Russia is not just defending against Ukrainian strikes, it is weaponizing Ukrainian strikes, turning Ukraine's own drones into instruments of political friction between Kyiv and its NATO allies. If a Ukrainian drone crashes into a Latvian oil storage facility, Latvia doesn't call Moscow to complain. Latvia calls Kyiv. And the relationship between Ukraine and its most committed supporters gets a little more complicated. That is not an accident. That is a method. The Latvia case is the clearest proof of how damaging that method can be. On May 7th, 2 suspected Ukrainian drones crossed into Latvia. One of them crashed into a fuel storage facility in eastern Latvia. The Latvian population received emergency alerts more than an hour after it happened. The defense minister resigned 10 days later. Prime Minister Ivica Salina, who who had been in office since 2023, who had committed Latvia's defense spending to nearly 5% of GDP, who had personally championed drone support for Ukraine, resigned on May 14th after her coalition collapsed. A government fell, not because of a Russian missile, not because of a ground incursion, because of Ukrainian drones redirected by Russian electronic warfare that Latvian radar didn't pick up in time. That is a significant strategic achievement for the Kremlin, accomplished without firing a single weapon at a NATO country directly. So now we have 3 data points on the table. Romania, a Russian drone unintercepted strikes a residential building. The first time in this war that Russian drones have caused casualties on NATO territory. Estonia, a likely Ukrainian drone, redirected by Russian jamming, successfully intercepted by Romanian F-16s over uninhabited terrain. Latvia, likely Ukrainian drones redirected by Russian jamming crash on Latvian soil, triggering a political collapse that cost Latvia its prime minister and its defense minister. What connects these 3 incidents is not coincidence. It is a consistent pattern of airspace pressure along NATO's eastern flank, exploiting both the physical limitations of border geography and the political fragility of alliance consensus. And the pattern is not slowing down, it is accelerating. Here is where I want to push back on what I expect will be the dominant reaction to Romania. The calls are already forming. Article 5, red lines, a firm response. Draw the line now. I understand the impulse, I genuinely do. When an ally's apartment building is burning because of a Russian drone, the demand for a proportionate response is legitimate. But I want you to think carefully about what a firm response actually does in this specific situation, and more importantly, what it does for Putin. Vladimir Putin stood in front of reporters in Astana on Friday and said he had only just heard about the incident. He questioned whether the drone was even Russian. No one can say what the origin of this or that drone is until an examination has been carried out, he said. That is not confusion, that is positioning. Because what Putin needs more than anything right now is a narrative for the Russian domestic audience. A narrative that NATO is the aggressor, that the West is escalating, that Russia is being threatened, that ordinary Russians need to rally around the state against an alliance that is actively hostile to them. Right now, that narrative is struggling. Russian force generation is strained. The prospect of a genuine Russian offensive against a Baltic state is remote. Not impossible, but remote. The last thing Brussels wants to hand Moscow is a Western overreaction that does Putin's propaganda work for him. NATO understands this, which is why the official response from Washington's ambassador was careful. Reckless incursion, not active war. Which is why President Dan of Romania convened the National Defense Council and promised proportionate measures without specifying what they are. That language is deliberate. It keeps options open without handing the Kremlin a headline. The real solution was always further east. Russian drones should not be reaching the Romanian border because they should be intercepted well inside Ukrainian territory. Ukraine has the manufacturing capacity to expand its interceptor network. What it lacks is the capital to fully deploy it across the western half of the country, the buffer zone that should be absorbing these threats before they become NATO's problem. Europe could be funding exactly that, explicitly, strategically, not as a political gesture, but as the most practical and lowest escalation ladder option available. A better Ukrainian drone net in western Ukraine means fewer Romanian intercept windows. It means fewer drones approaching the Latvian border. It means fewer governments falling over incidents that shouldn't have gotten that far in the first place. NATO's Operation Eastern Sentry stood up after Article 4 consultations in September 2025 was the right architecture. The question is whether the upstream solution matches the downstream pressure. Right now, it doesn't quite. But the gap is manageable. And the fact that it is being managed, carefully, without overreaction, with eyes open to what Putin is actually trying to accomplish, is the part of this story that deserves more credit than it gets. 2 people were hurt in Galati on Friday morning. That matters. Every spin of the roulette wheel matters. What also matters is understanding that the wheel keeps spinning not because NATO is failing, but because Russia has figured out that drones are cheaper than tanks, harder to attribute, and politically disruptive in ways that missiles simply aren't. The response to that is not louder rhetoric. It is better coverage, further east, funded before the next apartment building catches fire. Pay attention to where the next drone lands, because it will land somewhere. The question is whether the architecture built to stop it has moved fast enough to be there first.